Well, Paul, good morning, and thank you for making your time to share with us.
My pleasure.
The greatest excitement here at STGCC here in Singapore. Tell us a little bit more about your upcoming work that's in progress right now. Any plans for collaboration or with Asia and the West?
Well, one of the neat things about how comics are done these days is we use artists from all over the world. So I just came off a long run of Legion of Superhero stories with an artist named Yildirat Çınar from Istanbul. So I've just been, I don't know, that's not this corner of Asia, but last I looked, that counts as being over the line. It would be great to work with some artists from this area. I did a ton of work early in my career with artists from the Philippines. Had a lot of fun working with them. Fred Carrillo, Jerry Talea were collaborators at different times, and got to work as an editor with people like Nestor Redondo and Alfredo Alcala, some of the greats from South Asia. So I look forward to the opportunity to do that again. Right now I'm writing about 4 comic projects for DC. Legion of Superheroes with an artist named Francis Portela, who's based in Spain. A series called The Huntress with Marcus Bowe, who's an American. A Legion miniseries, Legion Secret Origins, with why am I blanking on his name? Absolutely terrible. I apologize. The train has completely gone on me. I have his pages to balloon this afternoon. So, Casey, and also an American, and then a Batman series with Dennis Cowan. So. Who knows what the next thing will be? Maybe it will be someone from this area.
So, wouldn't there be any compromises between the characters and the feel of creating these guys? Were there any challenges when you create the story with those guys internationally?
You start out with a certain concern when you're working with an artist who doesn't share your language to make sure that the communication works. As a writer, particularly in comics, a lot of times you use idiom in your art direction, and you want to make sure that that idiom is something that doesn't mistranslate to the artist, doesn't confuse him, doesn't make it more difficult. It's much easier today to work with an artist from far away in the era of Google than it was when I started writing comics. When I began writing comics and you wrote a script for an artist in the Philippines, for example, if you said, and the character drops a letter in a mailbox, you didn't really know whether or not they knew what a generic American mailbox looked like, or whether they'd have in their reference file a British post box, which isn't that similar, but it's not the same thing, or some other perfectly natural misread. Now, it takes about a second for the artist to look it up online. They don't have to run to a library. And if it's something very specific that you want them to do, you just look it up yourself, embed the URL in your script, and say, look, it doesn't have to be this, but this is what I had in mind. In my recent Huntress script, the storyline is set in Italy, Naples and Pompeii and that area largely, and I had a mobster who had a particularly nice villa. So I spent 5 minutes looking online at the kind of villa I envisioned him doing, and I tossed that at Marcus, who was drawing the story, and Was it useful inspiration? I don't know. But what he ultimately drew was something that was very much his own, but certainly in tune with what I was hoping for. So you have some of that as a challenge. You also have the great opportunity, particularly on scripts like The Legion, which is a science fiction series set 1,000 years in the future, that you can draw on a wider kind of experience. You know, in any culture, you get embedded in certain ideas of what the conventional wisdom of what the future will be. And that tends to start with an extrapolation from your present circumstance. Well, if you walk around Singapore, the architecture of Singapore is extraordinarily different than the architecture of New York. They're both island cities, they're both very modern cities in many ways, they're both very vertical cities. Singapore has a willingness to use a little more land around its tall buildings and a little more, I'll call it humor, in its stylization. So whether it's the three towers of the sands with the kind of spaceship sitting on top of it, or even the kind of arc that the Mandarin Oriental cuts, that would be very rare for New York, which is a very grid-oriented city. So if you wanted to set a story in a Singapore of 1,000 years from now, it would kind of help to actually look at what Singapore is. Or if you wanted to invent a planet that had an entirely new architecture, you might say, well, here's what Singapore looks like. Imagine what they could do with 1,000 years more of technology. Could you have an entire city connected on the top like the sand so that it was envisioned Stonehenge composed of skyscrapers with a continuous band circling around the top of glass or something? I don't know, I'm making this up. But you can begin to have that kind of conversation with an artist, and it becomes richer when the artist has visual ideas influenced by their own culture, their own environment. There's more in the world than any of us get to see.
So, speaking about vision, is that how you would see Singapore for your future projects? Is there any a prospect that you might engulf in?
Oh, I think it would be very surprising if I didn't set something in Singapore in the Legion material. I mean, it's very cool. I'm not the most traveled American, but I've traveled to a fair amount of the world, and many of my stories include iconic things that I visited, because it kind of goes into the Velcro brain and it sticks there, and it's like, oh, that would be neat, The Tower of London. Could the Tower of London still be standing 1,000 years from now? Are there still going to be ravens hopping around on the lawn of the tower, as the mythology says that if the ravens ever leave, there'll be no England anymore? So that showed up in a Legion story many years ago after the, I guess, second time I had visited England. Places that I haven't been, but just that I have friends. I was telling you about a model gal I know who's Taiwanese, and after a lunch or a dinner with her one evening, I was starting a new Legion store, and was, I could set this in Taiwan. They're really good at manufacturing computer equipment. Maybe that'll still be true 1,000 years from now. I need to do a story with a raid on a robot manufacturing plant. Let's design Taiwan so 1,000 years from now it's half factory as an island, and the other half is like nature preserve. And you have fun with it. So Singapore is now in my data bank, and I would certainly expect to make some good use of it. Whether you guys will like what I do to it, often that involves, let's say, someone coming and trying to destroy the place, or playing pick-up sticks with the sand towers. These aren't necessarily cheery things when you're in a comic book story, but
Yeah.
But it's fun.
Well, Paul, tell us, is there any prospect in the line right now where movies are concerned? Is there any work that's been picked up from the industry to make a movie from your work? And at the same time, when you reflect back on your work itself, who are the characters that you really, have a close relationship with?
Well, there's no plans that I'm aware of doing any films based on anything that I've written. There are so many incredible DC characters. It always shocks me how much people remember things I've written. But out of the 40,000 comics DC's published, I've written 300. So you're down a little bit under 1%. There's a lot of other stories to tell. I was lucky enough to see one of my characters center in a TV series about a decade ago in Birds of Prey. Statistically, that's probably better than my lifetime batting average entitles me to, so I've got no complaints. The characters that I'm most associated with, certainly the Legion of Superheroes. Those were characters I loved as a kid. I'm now on my third run of writing them over the last 35 years. Scary. I was very young when I started. The Huntress, a version of whom I created in the late 1970s. Lots of other characters that sort of have less fame in the DC universe, but no one ever seems to die forever in comics, so who knows what I'll get to play with again.
Yes. Can I say? I need a frank opinion as to what you think of the DC review.
I hope it's wonderful. I haven't read anything much of it beyond what I've written. I'm not in the middle of the decision-making process. That's not my job anymore, thank God. The people who are leading the program are strong comic book creative people. Jeff's as in tune with the market a writer as there is today. Jim is an incomparable artist. Dan has been a terrific P.T. Barnum for the line, playing impresario and cheerleader and driving projects. I hope it's fabulous. I'm looking forward to reading them and seeing. I can't tell you with any more knowledge than you've got. The comic industry was starting to age out at the same moment that the industry was beginning to expand radically. So pretty much all the kids of my generation who really loved comics got to try their hand at working in the business one way or another, if they were around New York. Kids like George Perez, who was going to high school in the Bronx while I was going to high school in Manhattan. Lots of names that you're less familiar with. Len Wein, Mark Wolfman on the writing side, who were a few years older than I was. Jerry Conway, about 5 years older than I was. We were all, if you will, neighborhood brats. And we hung around the office environment. We got to know the people in the business. And we got chances very, very young. Different ages for different people, different things. Some of the people got a chance, and it didn't work out particularly well, either to their taste, or they didn't have the exact skill the business wanted. So they went off and they did other wonderful things, or not so wonderful things in a few cases. And some of us just stayed forever because it was a very cool environment to be a part of. It's a little harder, I think, to break in as young today because the companies are bigger, they're a little more corporate. They probably would check to see that you had working papers or that they were doing it in a formal and appropriate fashion. But it still is a business of young people. You have a lot of particularly young artists coming into the field, and you have people coming in from everywhere. And the other thing that militates against the 14-year-old getting in, when I came in, you had to be in New York. So the pool you were picking from, New York's a big city, it's a big metropolitan area, but even if you draw the circle pretty widely, 20 million people, 25 million people in the metro area at the time, maybe. If you were the most talented artist in the world, but you happened to live in Singapore, there wasn't a chance in hell you were going to be able to work in American comics at that time. We had a little bit of work coming out of the Philippines because there was a studio set up there. That was about the only overseas work DC was buying. There was a studio in Spain that was providing a little bit of work to Warren. And I don't think there was a South American artist working in American comics. I don't think there was a French artist. There wasn't yet a British artist working in American comics. Well, now we're looking everywhere. You can get the work in as quickly and as easily with the internet. You have access to things like Google to help solve translation problems, communication problems. So they're not as likely to need to get a 14-year-old because they can pick from 3 billion people as opposed to 20 million people. And hopefully that's a part of why the standards of comics in America have been going up over the years, at least in terms of visual imagination.
What is the future of comics, Paul? I mean, is it going to be like online, or is it going to be print?
Tell me what your unborn child is going to want. It's very clear that the young people of today include a large number of people who want to be entertained through a screen, whether that's a tablet or a smartphone or a traditional computer screen. Someone somewhere will come up with a form of comics that doesn't exist today, that is more entertaining displayed in a computer form than it is in a print form. I've not seen that yet. It may even exist now. It may be some kid in a basement in Singapore or in Iowa has come up with it. People may be looking at it, but I haven't seen it yet. I've seen things that are ways of displaying a print comic on a screen, or of creating something that could be in print appearing on a screen, like most of the web comics. I haven't yet seen a lot of interesting experiments that are only possible to tell as cartoon stories on a screen. When someone comes up with that, if they do, that will be an interesting new form of comics. Will it replace print? I don't know. I certainly hope not. I'm an old print guy. I like the smell and feel of print. I suspect it'll live alongside it at least for a generation. And then it's a question of what your kid's going to want. Racist or religiously centered purposes, destructive things to really no end as a world. We have to solve that. And part of how we solve all of that is people standing up and saying, this isn't acceptable. You're never going to reduce prostitution to zero in the world. It's been around thousands and thousands of years on some basis or another. But that we have these massive systems of international sex trafficking to, have encouraged parents in poor countries to sell their children into slavery. It's a horrifying thing. And you read the Singapore newspaper. It's a lovely country. It's a very civilized country. And there's a massive 2-page article on somebody putting some graffiti on a train. Okay, graffiti on a train is not a good thing, and maybe there is no sex trafficking anywhere near Singapore. I'm willing to believe that. I don't know better. But I suspect there is. Just a wild guess. And I'm not saying America's better. We've got more graffiti, and I'm sure we have more sex trafficking. People need to be angry. They need to be saying, "Cut this shit out. Let's figure out what we can do to improve human life." And to be able to write a character who embodies a little tiny bit of that. And I've tried in my stories, whether it's the ones that are set in the future or the ones that are set in the present, they're not political tracks. This is entertainment. I try not to be preachy, but they try to reflect things that I believe have something to say about where the world's going to be. And that can be as simple as a gay couple in the 30th century talking about a trailing spouse transferred to the science police on another planet, or it can be a superhero in the 20th century trying to do something about sex trafficking. But all of it either says, if we're going to live another 1,000 years as a population, we're going to figure this shit out, because otherwise we're just going to all end up dead. And that, I think, is a writer's obligation, but it's also, on some level, a citizen's obligation. So you start talking about what the challenges are.
Openly, like vomit-inducing, crying and tossing in my sleep. It's like my brother's favourite comic was The Ball Run, and my brother is like 6'4", and he would tear my head off if I ruined Ball. So there's a physical motivation there. But it's kind of, in some ways, the fact that it was so like desperate. As I'm a kind of like somebody who no way has that profile. I figured I was doomed. It's like, even if it was good, I thought people would hate it because JMS was so well respected. And they would hate me just because I wasn't JMS. So in that case, that was kind of freeing, as I realised it didn't matter. All I had to worry about was essentially, would I do a story I liked? And I did, and it was kind of, all I did was concentrate on the actual work, and it turned out okay, which was the most wonderful thing about it. And that, immediately the reviews were very good, which was completely not what I was expecting. So it was nice, and it was kind of a useful lesson, as in it's kind of to think of the best of people rather than just like thinking it's going to all go wrong. Optimism works.
That question was actually from my friend in the UK, Ian, and he's a big fan of yours. And he has actually a web comic, and so he would like to know what other tips you could give for a UK writer, aspiring writer, to make it into comics.
Oh, just do it. I mean, he sounds like he's doing exactly what he should be doing. The best way to get into comics is to pick up something and just do it. I mean, the way I got into comics was doing small press, self-published work, like literal photocopies and staples. I did web comics. I did, I ended up doing editorial comics for magazines. It was just kind of just doing stuff. And if you do stuff and you get stuff out there, you will essentially meet people and you'll make contacts with people, and it can good work out. And define good work however you wish, but there's so many different ways to get a career in comics. But you end up gravitating towards people who essentially have similar aesthetic preferences to you. And it's almost, it was a thing like, my first comic came out, and it's a little 5-page story. When that came out, a couple of other artists said, "Oh, I like that, do you want to do something sometime?" And then I did a story with them, and that led to working with other artists and other artists. And that's kind of been my whole career, essentially just the last work leads to your next work. Whether you're doing it for free on a website or whether you're doing it for Marvel, it's all kind of a similar continuum. Anyway, that's it.
So what's your inspiration behind in getting yourself involved with the X-Men?
Wow.
How did that begin?
It's a weird thing. It's like I come from, like I said, an indie comics background, so I don't think about stuff until I'm asked. It's that kind of like, I've never actively gone out and pitched a comic for like Marvel or stuff. It's always they've asked me, "Kieron, have you got an idea for Dazzler comic?" And I'll sit down and think, okay, have I got an idea for a Dazzler comic? And in the case of the X-Men, it was similar to that, in that I kind of been working with the X Office. I did a book called Thord, which is kind of a spin-off of Astonishing X-Men, and that did well critically, and Marvel liked it. Didn't do very well in sales, but can't have everything. And then I was doing a book called Generation Hope, which I'm doing like 12 issues of. And that was kind of happening. I was working closely with Matt, and the situation where Matt basically, his schedule, he was doing Fear Itself, he was doing Iron Man, he's doing Thor, something had to give. So it's okay, Matt, we'll move Matt off X-Men. The fact that I've been working with Matt, and the fact that they like my work, and they, especially because I didn't mess up Thor, I think, said that, are you interested in doing X-Men? And I said, yeah, probably. And it was that kind of like, no, it's the acting X-Men. I always joke, it's like, my mum fancies Wolverine, when you're writing a character your mum knows and fancies, you're dealing with very powerful pop culture objects. So in that case, it's like, what do I think about the X-Men, what do I think is interesting, where is the story now, where do I think where's an interesting way to take it, and from the off I knew what my themes were, and it's about community, a community in a world that hates you, trying to build a community in modern times, and these are relevant questions. I mean, a lot of my friends are like political journalists, and I'm very inspired by the political situation in Britain, in both like the riots last year and the riots now, and the whole sort of like class structure and that kind of thing. That's all very fascinating. I mean, most superheroes that say the student protests last year, they would probably be on the police side, as in make sure there wasn't trouble. There's a fair chance the X-Men might be on the student side, and that's kind of one of the things I find quite appealing about them. They're not actually working for the government. These are actually private individuals that are choosing to do something they think is quote unquote the right thing. I find the X-Men are always inspiring in that way. Yeah, looking. Actually, the short answer is they asked me to do it, and I said yes.
Have you started to pitch their ideas to Marvel, or are you still waiting for new projects from them?
No, it's got my schedule. So I'm writing Journey to Mystery, and I'm writing X-Men, and they're kind of pretty much coming out twice a month, and that's kind of like that's about how much work's comfortable, and that's why I stopped doing Generation Hope, because the main reason anyway. There's so many hours in the day, and we've got the plan for X-Men ongoing to a certain point. We've got Journey to Mystery, which I've got a rough plan for about 40 issues. So it's kind of like that's a big block of time for me, especially because I'm also doing like indie work as well of my own. And when you're doing that amount of stuff, you think I don't want the quality to slip. I've known people who were talking too much work, and they realise it's too late. And I don't want to do anything I'm unhappy with. So no, I'm not planning anything particular at the moment, though. It'd be nice to get a mini-series around the side. That's a good thing. If you're doing ongoings, you do a mini on the quiet. You never know. There's certainly stuff I would like to do with Marvel. If I had like 48 hours in the day, I would have so much, there's never a shortage of ideas or urges. Yeah.
What's your second life?
My second life?
Yeah.
I barely have a first life. Well, I used to be a games journalist. I used to write about video games. And I still co-own a website, which is like a British-based PC games website called Rock Paper Shotgun, which it makes money, which is a miracle. And I sort of co-own that, so I still occasionally go and write a big piece of serious games criticism about a game no one has played and no one cares about except for me. Which is, fun. And I also, I'm very into music, which is my background in comical phonogram, which is about pop music and magic as a metaphor. So that's part of it. And I'm a big fan of lying around and sleeping. Sleeping and resting and buying suits. That's kind of what I do.
High fidelity, what would be your top 10? Maybe.
Top 10 for when?
Let's say 90s.
90s, oh man. I hate lists. As in, like, I'm very much mentalist. I'm anti-list. I don't believe in the idea of ordering things. I'm kind of like the idea of having a favourite song. It's just kind of alien to me. So, on the other, and also the secondary problem is I take those sort of questions too seriously. As in, I have to have graphs and like how what is actually right and wrong. Okay, top 10 songs of the 90s off the top of my head. Common People by Pull. Girl Boy Song by Aphex Twin, Candy Pop by Biff, Fight the Power by Public Enemy, that was 90s, just crept in. Cowboy Fears Satan, Me and the Major by Dan Sebastian. Is it Power to the People by The Makeup? Just the 2000s. I think Isha by Death in Vegas was literally like the last month of the 2000s. Ooh, Just a Little Bit by Gina G. I'm running out of time. I can't even think of songs now. And Kaneki, I Would Fix You. Oh.
I'd like to put myself to work. I think Kieron, most difficult question you probably would add Kieron.
So, tell us, what is the future of comics? Do you prefer print or online?
I don't think it's either or. You know, the future of comics is a mix. The future of comics is a form of human expression, and that can be anything. You know, it's just pictures in order to tell a story. And you know, and even if if there was nuclear war, people would still be doing comics in a kind of way, and they'll be doing it on walls or bits of human flesh in tattoos. You know, this is about the way that humans have been telling stories for millions and millions of years. If you're talking about the industry, and the industry is I think it's very important to get the idea of comics as art and comics as industry is separate in your head. Industry is a way of monetising a form of human expression, which that sounds like a bad thing, but I mean that in a purely like objective way. The future of comics is well, I'm not stupid enough to make any predictions, but it's a complicated. You can definitely see one part of the future where periodical comics are cheap, very, very cheap. The idea, or even free. The webcomic model works well, and the webcomic, you can do it by the merchandising if you want. I've got several people who do that. And the flip is the webcomic to print model. I mean, Warren Ellis is a friend of mine, and Freak Angels works really, really, really well for him. That's like, as far as I'm aware, that's the best-selling Avatar trade. And there's no reason to give away all for any profits on the back end. The other flip is you can actually make the digital comics very, very, very cheap, but still paid for, and then you actually have the collector's editions for more expensive. I mean, we've seen we talk about print dying out, but the most interesting thing for me in print in the last 5 years is the more expensive art objects. There's print switches designed as totems. These are things which are meant to be fetish objects, essentially, and you don't just buy the stuff you read casually, you buy the stuff you want essentially as a thing, and the people creating these as art things, and there's that middle ground you might see hurting, but there's people are comic collectors, and there's some people who just like to collect comics as part of this American tradition going all the way back to, the 30s or whatever. The future of comics is complicated, the same way the past of comics is complicated, and that's what's fun about it. If I knew how it was going to be, I don't think I'd be doing it.
A little something about writing in particular.
Absolutely.
A little something about writing in particular.
Yeah.
What do you think actually defines the writing of a script?
Wow. If I knew, I'd be a lot richer than I am. Or at least more popular. There's a lot of people talk about when I actually speak to people about how art works or how to write, or especially thing with comics. In fact, this applies to art generally, but I think it especially applies to comics. And every single writer I know writes comic scripts differently. I mean, an Alan Moore script is like a novel, the cliche, John Wagner, the 2000 AD guy who mainly writes Judge Dredd, his scripts are like exciting telegraphs, is the way people describe it. And both of these are good comics, So the lesson I take from that is whatever works. It's gonna the only thing you can really judge a comic by is whether it has created a good comic at the end of it. And whatever route you've taken, like some people write these very impressionistic letters, and that's more form than expression. That's kind of the thing that I don't like saying this is how comics quote unquote should be. But for me, it's generally, if I'm crying when I'm writing something, that's normally a good sign. I can sort of, and I'm a big girl's blouse, to quote the traditional line. But if I'm emotionally moved by it, and it doesn't sit dead on the page, that's when you kind of know it's worked. And how do you create that kind of stuff? You just dig, and people say, oh, you don't. In some way, the audience is always you, in that you try like, do I give a toss about this? If I'm not interested in this, why on earth would anyone else be? I'm sort of like, okay, I mentioned Warren before, but Warren's an interesting example of somebody who doesn't have an enormous love for the superhero genre. but anyway, he talks extensively about this, but he's still done some of the best superhero comics of all time. And that's not because, he phones it in or anything. It's because he finds something he finds interesting in the genre. You look at the material and find what is interesting for me, and that's how you engage with it, and that's how you can create a good script. You've just got to give a toss. Caring is essentially, when you hire me to write a check, you basically when you hire me to write a comic, you're basically hiring me to, my soul for a week. It takes me to write it, and I wander around and obsess over the characters, and I get a bit weepy, and I get a bit angry. That's what the job is, which is fun. Which didn't have a comic shop, so you only really had the comics which were in newsagents. And I got into comics in my 20s, and I slowly inched back in a couple of trades a year, Vertigo stuff mainly. Then I hit 25, and I kind of just fell into it was a meeting like that, and within 6 months I was writing comics. So it was like an adult love affair. So I don't have I'm not like a Mark Waid kind of guy. I'm not somebody who has the incredible knowledge of the history, and I just what I do is I research. You just put me the work. So when I'm writing a script for Marvel, I find it quite often easier to make up a new character and bring back an old one. So I've created, if you actually go through almost every book I've done, there's a new character in most of them, and that's because I would rather, a good way to avoid continuity problems is just make something up the end. In which case, a lot of that is actually, especially if you're talking about villains and supporting casts, they're about saying something about the central character. A villain at its best should actually be, it's about the hero's worst fears, or it's about they embody something about them which is hard to articulate. Which I learn, and I do that with heroes. When I think about stories that's involving, I take the hero down to the raw essentials. What's Ares really about? And Ares for me was about this ancient idea of war. How does that compare with modern idea of war? And that's how my stories come about. And Peter A. Bill is he's an alien, but he's got the power of a god. Well, so that's talking science versus religion. He embodies this duality. So that's how I get the stories from that. And X-Men are about the stuff I talked about earlier. In terms of creating stuff from scratch, when I write a new character, there's not. This is a Neil. I'm quoting every single other writer in the world. There's something Neil Gaiman said today. People say, "Oh, which character is you?" No, all the characters are you, and they're little bits of you splintered off. And Doctor. It's like my first 4 arcs. It's it mainly circles around Doctor Doom and Balder. And Balder was basically a king. He's put in charge of a kingdom he doesn't really think he's able to do. He's going to try to do the best he can, but he's not very good at it. The Doctor is he's really, really, how dare these people look down at me? They have no idea how good I am. I'm the greatest person ever. And both of them were pretty much my mentality at the time, in terms of writing form. Part of me was Doctor Doom saying, fuck you all, I'm going to be the best. And the other one was like, oh, I'm in a bit deep now. And I spanned those fears and arrogance, the bad parts of me and the good parts of me, or at least the insecure parts of me. And they became the characters. So when I'm creating characters with raw emotions, I go down to primary. It's I talk about what do I really fear, what do I really hope. I mean, I've got a book coming out called The Heat for Avatar next year. And it's basically it's a cop drama set on Mercury, hence The Heat. Sorry. And the lead character is she's called Louisa, and I can't reveal that twist. But she's basically she's left she thinks she's wasted her 20s basically. She's been stuck in a job she doesn't really like, and now she's left it to go into her dream career, but she's mentally unsuited for it, and then there's something just a bit wrong in her head that stops her being able to do what she wants to do. And that was mainly inspired by a lot of female friends of mine. I was thinking about just being in their job and hating it, and and whilst she's an action character, that's something that's quite relatable. But that's kind of a bit like me. This was thought that when I was just getting into my 30s, I was looking back in my 20s, and in my darkest moments, I thought that was a wasteland. So is that kind of, what do you do when you think you've wasted a large part of your life? And whatever wasted means. And that's kind of where that character came from. Phonogram, it's all, with all those characters, half of them are people I've known, and I've just written them and made them into jokes. But I've also, despite them being other people inspired, they're all embodying things I worry about or think about. And it's a dialogue. That's what drama is about. You create characters and they talk to each other, and they eventually resolve something. I mean, Colin's phonogram is very, very clearly about me, but he's a critique of me. You know, it's not like I agree with anything he says. It's like, anyway, does that answer the question, or does it?
Yeah.
You have to
well, do you? Is this the first time I've been in Asia, and do you have any plans to include any of the characters from Asia, or places, or stories that's based in Asia, even in, like Singapore?
Oh, is that so? What I find amazing is Matt Fraction was here last year, and I can't believe there's a set of fight scene here. As in, like, I was just walking around, and this would look great with the fighting, you know. So yeah, you know, I draw from life. And I went to the character Tion in Generation Hope. It's pretty much because I made him because there's no Ukrainian superhero, so I made him Ukrainian, and I really like Kiev as a city. So I thought if we have a chance to do a story in Kiev, so yeah. There's no current plans. Kenji in Generation Hope is Japanese, but you know, I guess that's true. We talk about drawing for inspiration. The fact that I'm here, it's like, yeah, I'm sort of buzzing and I'm writing down ideas, and that's just how it works. You never know what's going to turn up where. No, this is actually the first time I've travelled to this part of the world, which is why it's really so amazing to be here. In fact, I've been to Australia, and that's the farthest I've been that way. But and I used to be a journalist, so I've travelled a lot. All over America, all over Europe, even to Russia and that kind of area. But that's why I'm so excited to be here. Just why Yabba. So yeah.
So you will be creating a character from Singapore, I hope.
I would, you know, I cannot promise anything, but it'd be nice to, you know. I was trying to think about that. It's like, is there anyone? It's like, shouldn't there? It would be good if I could.
Your work. Yeah. And currently, I know there are no plans to do a portfolio submission for writers.
Yes.
Is there going to be one in future?
You know, we do accept writer submissions. We always do. But the way that writers have to submit is different from how artists submit. It's, you know, artists can send us their portfolio of any artwork they've done for any publication, or just fan art. It doesn't have to be published. We take sample artwork. If someone draws their own comic, or draws a story with some of the Marvel characters, or we send a sample script and someone does it, they're free to submit any kind of artwork they want. With writers, we're a little more specific because of legal reasons in the United States about intellectual property, that it has to be published artwork. I'm sorry, it has to be a published story that is trademarked and copyright to you. So when we open it, you're legally protected as the writer that those are your ideas, you know? Because a lot of times there's been lawsuits in the United States where everybody can have the same idea. You know, there's millions and millions of people on this planet, and there's been lawsuits where Marvel or DC have published a story, and another person can sue us and say, oh no, I pitched that story, that's my idea. You know, one of the classic stories is Fables, Bill Willingham. You know, it's a story about fairy tale characters in the real world. And DC published that, and a writer came out and said, I submitted that story to DC years ago. But it's a very simple story. It's been told before outside of Fables. Just fairy tale characters in the real world. Yeah. There's 2 new TV series coming out that have nothing to do with Fables on the same concept. But years ago, DC got sued, and I think, it was a long, ongoing lawsuit about this idea because they didn't protect themselves. They were taking ideas from many different writers. I don't know all the details, but it's along those lines. We had something recently where we published a story called A Week in the Life of Wolverine, I think. Okay. And it was Monday, Wolverine is an Avenger. Tuesday, Wolverine is an X-Men. Wednesday, Wolverine is in Japan. And it was just a snapshot of every day of Wolverine's life. Simple idea. A week in the life of a superhero. It's been done in film. It's been done in novels. It's been done in documentary profiles. A week in the life of name any celebrity. And we published the story, and then I think 1 or 2 other people came and said, oh no, that's our idea. We had that idea for Wolverine, but we were protected because, we hadn't read their ideas because we didn't accept their submissions because they didn't follow the proper guidelines.
So this is the same as why Marvel doesn't accept unsolicited scripts.
Yes, that's exactly the reason, because if we do that, then we're opening ourselves up to a world of potential trouble. And also the fact is that if you can't draw, for the most part, you know you can't draw. Like, I know I can't draw. I knew I couldn't draw when I was young. I knew I couldn't be an artist. But, so if you're an artist and you're submitting to Marvel, you're pretty confident in your ability to be able to do that. But everybody thinks they could write. Everybody watches a movie, everybody reads a comic and thinks, oh, I have a better idea. So if we open it up to writers, the amount of submissions that we would get would be unmanageable. I mean, it would just be crazy.
How about a mentorship program?
We are, interesting enough, that's funny. You mentioned, so we are starting a mentorship program. We've been working on the details. I mean, there's obviously, again, some hurdles we have to overcome, especially in some of the financial aspects, and how are we going to pay the mentor, and how are we going to pay the mentee when they have a story published together. But we've been working with some of our top writers, like Bendis and Brubaker and a couple guys. Jason Aaron is especially interested in doing it. He's actually been working with Cullen Bunn on something along these lines now. We're kind of getting our feet wet with it, to have some of the bigger writers go out and find writers that they think are up and coming and mentor them in the Marvel system, and hopefully we can, bring them in, they write stories together, and then kind of push the chick out of the nest and let them, spread their wings on their own. So yeah, there's going to be more public details being made about that, I would say, within the next 6 months. We have a meeting about it in September while the writers are flying in, and it's one of the topics we'll be discussing.
Do you think that this program will be able to take here in Singapore as well?
Hopefully, with this, in this day and age, with the world getting smaller because of the internet, social media, more and more we're getting inquiries from writers and from artists, not just in Singapore, but all of Southeast Asia. In Africa as well now, people are contacting us about submitting their stories and their artwork. And once we have the details in place, it's really not going to matter where a person lives or what they've done. As long as they have access to the internet and they're able to send submissions into us when the program is open, we're probably going to be open to it no matter where they're from. So, and given the fact that Singapore is an English-speaking country, it gives you guys a very big leg up in the race on things, especially where writers are concerned.
Sounds great.
C.B, tell me, is there any plans that Marvel may perhaps set up a regional office in Southeast Asia?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I've joked that I'd love to be the head of the Marvel Singapore office because I love it here, and I think there's a lot of potential for Marvel, not just from the talent aspect, but from a business angle, to have an office here. But I met on Wednesday. I spent the day out at Disney, and then Disney Southeast Asia is run from here in Singapore, and they have some great people with good heads on their shoulders who are passionate about Marvel and willing to help us. And now that I know that, and we've met face to face, and we have a very comfortable relationship, I think it's going to be easier for us to work with Disney to expand Marvel's fan base and also content here, not just in Singapore, but use Singapore as a base to get to the rest of Southeast Asia. So while I don't know that we'll have a Marvel office here, I might be coming more, or more Marvel people might be coming more to work with Disney, out of Singapore.
So, is there any future plans for something like an exhibition or demonstration lectures besides just STGCC? But would there be a program that will be ongoing?
I don't know. We've had a great relationship with STGCC these last 2 years. It's growing. The Marvel booth is bigger this year. We did the exclusive comic with the Merlion. We worked with the Singapore Tourism Board to get the clearance for that. And it's been wonderful working with both groups, with Reed, STGCC, and also with the local government here in Singapore to show them that Marvel is passionate about our fans here. We want to reciprocate the love that we felt, give them back something exclusive. This is the first time we've ever done something like this. Putting an actual one of our characters with a monument from a country on an exclusive variant. And we're going to go back after this and judge what we can do going forward. Whatever we do, we're going to keep involved with STGCC, and I don't know what other kind of events would be available to us, but we will explore opportunities. But for now, this is going to be our home, our kind of growing relationship every year.
So what's the future for comics? Do you think online is going to be playing a very major role and replacing print?
I don't think it will replace print ever, and I think that online comics have a huge part of the growing business for all the publishers, not just comic publishers, but print publishers, newspapers. And no one's mastered it just yet. No one knows exactly how to do that. The problem is, one, piracy, obviously, but that's the problem that you hear the most of. The problem with comics that we have is comics is a collector's medium. It's not so much just reading like a newspaper or a magazine. It's a culture. It's a lifestyle. You go to the shop, you pick up your comic, you know, the smell of the paper, it's hearing your friends talk, it's about bitching about the storylines that you don't like, it's about praising the artwork on the covers that you do like, it's about talking with your shop owner, then it's about rereading, bagging and boarding, and collecting. So there's a lot of components that you can't do digitally, or that people haven't discovered how to do digitally. iTunes has done it well for music. They didn't just find a system how to sell music. They sold a system how to distribute music and also how to store music, you know. The iTunes is a fascinating device, and no one's invented an iTunes for comics just yet. And part of that reason is, I think, that it's petty, because we're all competing against each other. You know, Marvel, DC, Image, Dark Horse, we all have different apps and different ideas on what the digital strategy should be. To survive, maybe we're all going to have to come together and do something. I don't know. But, you know, Marvel, we have a lot of ideas, and we've been pushing a lot of the boundaries as far as digital is concerned. We've been throwing a lot against the wall, seeing what sticks. Exclusive content. We started with day and date. Now DC's making the next big step. They're going day and date with their entire line in September. Very bold move. And I think the rest of the industry right now is waiting to see how it's going to go. We have a relationship with a lot of our print retailers that we have to respect. When the market collapsed, when Marvel went bankrupt back in the day, it was the retailers who we trusted in to help build us back up. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship now. We keep them afloat, and they keep selling our stuff. And the last thing we want to do is disrespect the retailers by putting everything 100% digital. So there's a fine line that we have to walk in a lot of these. Any strategy we take with digital, there's so many factors that we have to consider that the fans might not see. But I always just want to reassure fans that we're working on it for the best possible solution.
Just last two questions from me, and that is, one, can you give us some percentages of the growth of your readership right now from the West and Asia?
Yep.
At the same time, do you think Stan Lee may visit Singapore anytime soon?
I'll start with the second question first. I would love to see Stan visit Singapore. I think he'd have a blast here. You know, Stan is just, he's one of the most amazing people I've ever met. He's a hero to me, and, you know, it still freaks me out every time I see him. I shake, oh my God, it's Stan Lee, you know? And I think Stan would have a blast here. I heard he was in Hong Kong recently, which I didn't know. So, you know, if he's traveling to Hong Kong, if the opportunity arises, I think Stan would love to come here to Singapore. And the first part of the question, now I slipped my mind.
The percentage of the readership, has it grown?
Yes, it's growing.
What is it like?
I don't know the exact numbers. I saw some figures recently about the growth of comics and manga in Asia. And you know, Singapore was one of the bigger expanding areas. I don't have the exact figures, but you know, for Marvel, we've always had trouble penetrating a lot of the Asian market. Singapore's always embraced our comics, and you know, we're making a concerted effort now to try to push more titles here into the market through the stores, work with the retail partners. And you know, going forward, the variant cover that we have here is the first step in trying to grow the Singapore market and show how much respect we have for the culture, and also kind of a thank you to fans. The next thing I want to do, from a Marvel perspective, is hopefully be able to tell a story, an actual comic book set here in Singapore, where some of our heroes come to visit, or we create some kind of story based around the nation here. So we'll see.
Yeah. Sorry, just last question. I forgot that's in my mind, and that is Marvel doing anything to make comics affordable? Because I mean, it's coming from the United States.
Yeah, and that's an extremely difficult question, and I'm not in the best position to answer it. You know, people expect Marvel to hire the best artists and the best writers, and we do. And what goes along with that is they get paid a lot more than everybody else. So, you know, it's a ratio of the times with their salaries, with printing costs, and we're trying to keep the prices as low as we possibly can. And I know our marketing and sales department is working on that. We recently dropped the prices on a couple books, on Uncanny X-Men and a few titles, to try to drop the price and make it more affordable for readers. And we're going to do what we can to keep prices reasonable, but there's only so much we can push given what sales are and what the market can hold.
Thank you.
Print titles, open the kind of stories that are in Marvel as well.
And you know, it's hard to say because our level of penetration hasn't been direct. You know, we haven't been selling directly to the Singapore market. We've been working with our retail partners here, also through Diamond, sell to G&B, to Absolute, to Harris Leonard, to the different shops over the years, you know, going back to the old Comics Mart, you know, and but there's always, when we look at the sales for the Asian region, you know, based on Marvel, Singapore's always been one of the top areas for that. Again, because there's English-speaking country, and you are able to get the comics pretty readily through the number of stores here. I think there's more comic stores per capita in Singapore than any other Asian country, which says something for the readership here.
Do you think that Marvel will be taking an approach to actually the younger audience?
Yes, definitely. And I think a big part of that is going to be with the launch of the Ultimate Spider-Man TV show. It's going to happen in the States early next year in the spring. And you know, I can't say exactly when it will be coming to Singapore, but I'm hoping it's going to kind of hit the rest of the world either next summer or next fall, depending on the territories and the broadcasters. But I know, you know, in meeting with Disney that they have high hopes for it here in Singapore. And to go along with that, we're going to have some publishing programs for younger readers so that it'll translate great from the kids who see the cartoon to go right into an easily accessible, new reader-friendly comic book.
Ultimate Spider-Man TV show.
Yep.
Is it going to be Peter Parker or Miles Morales?
It's Peter Parker.
Peter Parker.
Yes.
With the Stienberg.
Yep. All set?
Yeah.
Is that good?
Very.
Everyone?
How old were you when you started drawing?
When I was a kid,
Oh. So what inspired you to be an artist?
watching TV and
Oh, okay. So is your work been recognized right now today?
there are some recognitions.
Any plans? Any further plans to publish your own comic books or so?
Not really. Because don't really know how to draw. Yeah. Because I'm mostly do illustration, all this kind of things.
Sonny, what inspired you to create this new edition of Malinky Robot?
It's actually a compilation of old scripts.
Oh, okay.
So it's not like a new new titles. So stuff that appeared in Slide and other places all compiled together.
So how long did it take you to actually create this entire new content?
The first story was done a long time ago when I was doing art school.
Okay.
Back in 2001, I think.
Wow.
So I've been doing new stories every couple of years. So now, the last one was for the Flight 8, which came out this year as well.
Okay. Great. So this will be in stores in November.
No, it's actually out next week.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So those are actually my copies.